I never expected to become the villain in my family's story. For 42 years, I was Catherine Abbott, the dutiful daughter, the one who stayed in our small town while my younger brother Michael pursued his dreams in the big city, the one who checked my parents' blood pressure, drove them to doctor's appointments, and maintained their house when arthritis made it too difficult for them to manage on their own. It wasn't that I resented doing these things. I loved my parents, despite their flaws, despite the way they always seemed to hold Michael in higher regard. "Michael's doing so well with his investment banking career," they'd marvel during our Sunday dinners. "Did you see the photos of his new beach house? His children are growing up in such luxury." Meanwhile, my modest career as a high school English teacher, my comfortable but unglamorous home, my divorce 5 years ago, these were subjects approached with tight smiles and quick changes of conversation. But I accepted this dynamic as part of our family's fabric, a thread I couldn't pull without unraveling everything. Until 3 weeks ago, when I accidentally discovered they had cut me out of their will entirely. I was helping Mom organize her home office, another task Michael was too busy to assist with during his semi-annual visits. Dad was at his physical therapy appointment. As I sorted through a stack of papers needing to be filed, I came across a document with the heading, "Last Will and Testament of Robert and Eleanor Abbott." I shouldn't have read it. I knew that even as I pulled it from the envelope. But something compelled me, some sixth sense perhaps, that had been developing over years of subtle dismissals and barely concealed disappointment. The legal language was dense, but the bottom line was clear. Upon their deaths, everything. The house I'd helped maintain for 2 decades, the retirement accounts I'd helped them manage, the family heirlooms I'd grown up treasuring, would go to Michael. My name appeared only once, in a brief sentence acknowledging my existence but providing no inheritance. I was still holding the document, hands shaking, when Dad returned home. "What are you doing?" he demanded, seeing the will in my hands. "I found this while sorting Mom's papers," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Were you ever going to tell me?" He snatched the document from me, his face flushing. There was a moment, just a flicker, when I thought I saw shame cross his features. But it vanished quickly, replaced by the stern expression I'd known my entire life. "It wasn't your business to see this, yet." "Not my business? Dad, you've cut me out completely after everything I've done for you and Mom." "That's exactly the problem," he interrupted. "Everything you've done for us. You think we owe you now? That taking care of your parents entitles you to their possessions?" "That's not what I meant." "Michael has made something of himself," Dad continued, his voice rising. "He has 3 children to provide for. What would you do with an inheritance? Fund another failed marriage? You've always been a disappointment, Catherine, always taking the easy route, staying in this town, settling for mediocrity." The words struck like physical blows. Disappointment, the easy route, mediocrity. 20 years I'd structured my life around their needs, chosen to live 15 minutes away instead of pursuing opportunities elsewhere, spent my weekends handling their errands and household repairs, and this was how they saw me. "I see," I said finally, when I could trust my voice not to break. "Thank you for your honesty." I left without finishing the filing, without saying goodbye to Mom, who was napping upstairs. I drove home in a daze, pulled into my driveway, and sat there with the engine off for nearly an hour, replaying every sacrifice I'd made, every alternative path I hadn't taken, every moment I'd prioritized their needs over my own. That might have been the end of it. I might have swallowed this final injustice as I had swallowed so many smaller ones over the years. I might have continued my Sunday dinners and medical appointment chauffeur services, burying my hurt beneath the ingrained sense of duty that had shaped my adult life. But that night, as I mindlessly sorted through old papers in my own home office, a habit of organization I'd developed to cope with stress, I came across a faded envelope I hadn't opened in over a decade. Inside was a report from a genetic testing company I'd used years ago, curious about my ancestry after a colleague had shared her own surprising results. My results had been surprising too, though not in the way I'd expected. According to the DNA analysis, Robert Abbott was indeed my biological father, but my genetic profile showed no maternal match with Eleanor Abbott. I wasn't my mother's biological daughter. At the time, I'd dismissed it as a lab error. I looked like my mother, the same hazel eyes, the same widow's peak, the same dimple in the left cheek when we smiled. I'd intended to retake the test to prove the mistake, but life intervened. My marriage began its slow collapse, my parents required more assistance, and the envelope was filed away and forgotten. Until now. With trembling hands, I opened my laptop and ordered a new DNA test from a different company. This time, I requested the comprehensive package that could identify potential relatives in their database. 2 weeks later, the results confirmed what the first test had suggested. Robert Abbott was my biological father, but Eleanor Abbott was not my biological mother. Even more shocking, the database had identified a potential half-sibling, someone who shared approximately 25% of my DNA, not the 50% that would be expected for full siblings. Michael was not my full brother, he was my half-brother. The implications were staggering. If Eleanor wasn't my biological mother, but was Michael's, and Robert was father to us both, then Robert had fathered me with another woman. I was the product of an affair, brought into the family and raised as Eleanor's daughter. Or so I thought. But as I dug deeper into the family tree the DNA company had constructed, comparing it with dates and photos and fragments of family stories, another possibility emerged, one even more earth-shattering than my first conclusion. The DNA relative who shared 25% of my genetic material wasn't registered under their own name, but I could see their age, 45.3, years older than me, and their maternal DNA markers showed no connection to Eleanor Abbott. Michael wasn't my half-brother because I was the product of an affair. Michael was my half-brother because he was the product of an affair. I was Robert and Eleanor Abbott's biological daughter. Michael was Robert's son with another woman. The evidence was there once I knew to look for it. Michael's birth certificate, which I'd seen during estate planning discussions years ago, listed Robert and Eleanor as his parents. But he'd been born just 11 months after their wedding, when they were living in another state, a brief relocation I'd always been told was for Dad's first job out of college. Now I saw the timeline differently. A hurried wedding, a convenient job offer in another state, a return to our hometown with a baby in tow, introduced as their firstborn son. It made a twisted kind of sense. Dad's devotion to Michael, which had always seemed excessive even for a favored child, Mom's complicated relationship with him, loving but somehow distant in ways I'd never been able to articulate, the lack of baby photos from Michael's first few months, the family resemblance between Michael and Dad, but the absence of Mom's features in his face. I stared at the DNA results on my screen until my eyes burned. If I was right, my entire family history was a fabrication. The golden child was actually the living proof of Dad's infidelity, adopted and raised by Mom in a supreme act of forgiveness, or perhaps obligation, given the era and her devout Catholic upbringing. And I, the biological child they had later, had spent my life being compared unfavorably to the son my father had conceived with another woman. The irony was almost too much to bear. For days, I said nothing. I went through the motions of my life, teaching my classes, grading papers, even driving Mom to her dental appointment as scheduled. I declined Sunday dinner, claiming a migraine. I needed time to process, to decide what to do with this life-altering information. Christmas was approaching. We had always celebrated at my parents' house, with Michael and his perfect family flying in for the festivities. This year would be no different. Michael's wife Emily had already texted me about their arrival schedule, about the gifts their children were hoping for, about the special diet she was following, and would I please remind Mom? 3 days before Christmas, I made my decision. The Abbott family Christmas dinner had always been a formal affair. Mom's best china, Dad's carefully prepared prime rib, Michael holding court with stories of his important clients and exotic vacations. This year, I arrived early as usual, helping Mom with last-minute preparations, carefully avoiding any hint of what I now knew. Michael, Emily, and their 3 children arrived in their rented luxury SUV, bearing professionally wrapped gifts and tales of flight delays valiantly overcome. Dad embraced Michael like a returning hero, while Mom offered her usual reserved smile and polite inquiries about their journey. Dinner progressed as it always did. Dad carved the roast, Michael dominated the conversation, his children fidgeted with their devices under the table, Emily made comments about the caloric content of each dish, Mom refilled wine glasses, and I sat quietly, the dutiful daughter, passing dishes and asking appropriate questions about my niece and nephew's activities. Until the dessert course. As Mom served her traditional Christmas pudding, Michael raised his wine glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, his voice carrying the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "To another year of Abbott family success. Dad's investment portfolio continues to outperform the market thanks to my management. Mom's garden won 3 ribbons at the county fair, and my team at work just closed the Peterson acquisition, which means a very substantial bonus." He smiled magnanimously around the table. "Even Catherine has managed to keep her teaching position despite the school district's budget cuts." The familiar sting of his backhanded acknowledgement barely registered. I was too focused on what I was about to do. "I have an announcement too," I said as Michael sat down, satisfaction radiating from his expression. Dad looked impatient. "Can it wait until after dessert? The pudding will get cold." "No," I said quietly. "It can't wait any longer. It's waited about 42 years too long already." A hush fell over the table. Even Michael's children glanced up from their phones, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "I recently did one of those DNA ancestry tests," I began, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "I was curious about our family history, but I found something I wasn't expecting." Mom's face went pale. Dad's hand, reaching for his wine glass, froze mid-air. "It turns out," I continued, "that Dad is indeed my biological father, but Mom is not my biological mother." Emily gasped. Michael's expression darkened. "Catherine, this is hardly the time." I ignored him, my eyes fixed on my parents. At first I thought this meant I was the result of Dad's affair, that I had been born to another woman and somehow brought into this family. But then, I dug deeper. I reached into my purse and withdrew the DNA test results, placing them on the table beside my plate. The test identified a partial genetic match, a half-sibling who shares approximately 25% of my DNA, not the 50% that full siblings would share. I turned to Michael. "That half-sibling is you, Michael." The silence was absolute. Even the children sensed something momentous was happening, their devices forgotten in their laps. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Michael demanded, his voice tight with anger. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating a scientific fact. We share a father, but not a mother, and since I've confirmed that I am Mom and Dad's biological child, that means you are not Mom's biological son." Dad's face had moved beyond pale to ashen. Mom's hands trembled as she clutched her napkin. "This is absurd," Michael sputtered. "Some cheap mail-ordered DNA test must have gotten it wrong." "I did 2 tests from different companies," I replied. "The results were consistent. I also took the liberty of researching birth records from Lakeville, where you were allegedly born. There's no record of Eleanor Abbott giving birth at Lakeville General Hospital in February of 1978. Curious, isn't it?" "Catherine, stop this immediately," Dad commanded, but his voice lacked its usual authority. I turned to him, years of suppressed emotion finally breaking through. "Funny thing is, Dad, I'm the only biological child you and Mom have. Yet I'm the one who's always been a disappointment. I'm the one cut out of the will entirely, while your son from another woman gets everything." Emily looked at Michael in shock. What is she talking about? Michael ignored her, his face flushed with rage. "You're making this up because you're jealous. You've always been jealous of my success, my family, my relationship with Mom and Dad." "Am I making this up?" I asked softly, turning to my parents. "Mom? Dad? Would you like to explain to Michael why there are no photos of him as a newborn? Why there's no record of his birth at Lakeville General? Why his DNA doesn't match Mom's?" The room fell silent again. My father's hands clenched and unclenched on the tablecloth. My mother looked down at her lap, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "We were going to tell you," she whispered finally, addressing Michael. "So many times over the years we almost did, but it never seemed like the right moment." Michael stared at her, his expression shifting from anger to disbelief. "Tell me what? What are you saying?" Dad cleared his throat. "Your biological mother was a woman I knew in college, Diane. When she told me she was pregnant, I was already engaged to your mother. Eleanor and I had only been dating a few months, but in those days..." He trailed off, looking to Mom as if for permission to continue. Mom nodded slightly, still not meeting anyone's eyes. In those days, engagements weren't broken except for the most serious reasons, she finished for him. And Robert's family was traditional, old money, old values. Diane didn't want to keep you, Dad continued, his voice strained. She was heading to law school, had big ambitions. Abortion wasn't legal yet, and adoption meant giving you up entirely. So we made an arrangement, Mom said, finally looking up at Michael. We got married quickly, moved to Lakeville where no one knew us, and when Diane gave birth, we took you home as our own. The birth certificate lists us as your parents because Robert bribed an administrator at the hospital. By the time Catherine was born 3 years later, we were back here, established as a family. No one questioned it. No one knew. Mom's tears flowed freely now. I've always loved you as my son, Michael, always. Michael's face had gone from flushed to pale, his expression shifting between shock, disbelief, and the dawning horror of recognition. Emily reached for his hand, but he pulled away. Who is she? He demanded. My biological mother. Is she alive? Did she ever try to contact me? Dad shook his head. Diane died about 15 years ago. Breast cancer. She never married, never had other children. She kept her part of the agreement. No contact, no claims. 15 years ago? Michael's voice rose. She was alive most of my life and you never told me? Never gave me the chance to meet her? We thought it was better, Dad began. Better for who? Michael shouted, standing so abruptly his chair toppled backward. Better for you, obviously. Better for your reputation, your comfortable fiction. Not better for me, to be kept in the dark about my own identity. His children watched wide-eyed, their young faces reflecting confusion and alarm. Emily reached for the youngest, pulling him into her lap as if to shield him from the emotional shrapnel flying around the table. And you, Michael turned to me, his voice thick with accusation, you decided to drop this bomb at Christmas dinner, in front of my children? I met his gaze steadily. Would you have preferred I keep the family secrets going for another generation, let the lies continue, because that was working so well for everyone? You could have told me privately, given me time to process before exposing all this in front of my family. There was truth in that, I had to admit. My choice of timing and venue had been deliberately devastating, calculated for maximum impact. But after years of swallowing slights, of watching him bask in unearned favoritism, of having my contributions dismissed and his amplified, I had wanted him to feel the ground shift beneath his feet in the same sudden, public way mine had when I found that will. You're right, I acknowledged. I could have handled this differently. But finding out I'd been cut out of the will after 20 years of caring for Mom and Dad while you visited twice a year, that changed something in me. Made me realize our entire family dynamic has been built on lies. The will, Emily repeated, looking from me to my parents. What about the will? Dad sighed heavily. We updated our estate plan recently. Given Michael's financial expertise and his children's future educational needs, we decided to leave everything to him. Emily's expression shifted from confusion to disapproval. Everything? Nothing for Catherine? Robert, that doesn't seem fair. Life isn't fair, Dad snapped, some of his old authority returning. We made our decision based on what made the most sense for the family legacy. The family legacy, I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. Which family would that be, Dad? The one you've pretended to have or the real one? Michael was still standing, his body rigid with tension. I need some air, he muttered, striding from the dining room. The front door slammed moments later. Emily looked at her children, then at me, then at my parents. I think we should go back to the hotel, she said quietly. The children don't need to hear any more of this tonight. No one argued as she gathered the kids and their belongings. Mom attempted to press leftover containers into her hands, a bizarre adherence to hostess protocol in the midst of family implosion, but Emily politely declined. Once they had gone, the three of us sat in silence at the ruins of our Christmas dinner. The pudding had gone cold, untouched. The festive candles had burned low. Was it worth it? Dad asked finally, his voice ragged with emotion. Destroying your brothers? Half-brothers, I corrected automatically. Half-brother's understanding of his identity? Turning our Christmas into a scene from a daytime soap opera? Was your revenge satisfying, Catherine? I considered the question seriously. It wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. All my life, I've felt like I was missing something, like there was some fundamental reason I could never measure up in your eyes. Now I understand. You've been overcompensating, trying to ensure Michael never felt like he didn't belong, that he never questioned his place in the family, and in the process, you made me feel exactly that way. Mom reached across the table, attempting to take my hand, but I withdrew it. We never meant to hurt you, she said softly. We love you, Catherine. You're our daughter. Your only actual daughter, I pointed out, yet I'm the one excluded from the will, the one constantly compared unfavorably to Michael, the one whose life choices are seen as disappointments rather than personal decisions. The will was a mistake, Dad admitted, surprising me. We got caught up in Michael's suggestions about tax advantages and estate planning efficiencies. He made it sound so logical. And you didn't think to question whether his logic might be self-serving? Whether cutting out your only biological child might be, I don't know, morally questionable? Neither of them answered. The silence stretched, filled with 42 years of unspoken truths, of small decisions that had compounded into a family structure built on quicksand. I should go, I said finally, standing up. I've said what I needed to say. Catherine, wait, Mom pleaded. It's Christmas. We can still salvage something from this evening. Talk through things as a family. I looked at the woman who had raised me, who had loved me in her way, even as she participated in a system that consistently undervalued me. We can talk another day, Mom. Tonight, I need space to process everything just as much as Michael does. I drove home through empty streets, Christmas lights blurring through my tears. The emotional fallout of my revelation was more complex than I'd anticipated. There was vindication, yes, but also grief for the family I'd thought I had, for the relationships that might never recover from this night. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts and calls that I ignored. When I finally checked it at home, I was surprised to see Michael's name among the missed calls. His text was brief. Can we talk tomorrow, alone? I responded with a simple yes and tried to sleep, though rest eluded me for most of the night. The next morning, Christmas Day, Michael arrived at my house early. He looked as if he hadn't slept either, his usually immaculate appearance rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. We sat in my living room, two strangers connected by half their DNA and a lifetime of misconceptions. Why didn't you tell me privately, he asked, his first words since arriving. Why humiliate me in front of my family? Honestly? Because I was angry, because I'd just found out I'd been cut out of the will after dedicating my adult life to helping Mom and Dad, because you've spent decades condescending to me, treating me like I'm less than you, when it turns out I'm the only biological child they have. He flinched at my bluntness, but didn't argue. I didn't know, he said after a moment, about any of it. Not about being adopted or whatever this arrangement was, not about the DNA, not even about the will. Not fully. I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. I suggested they update their estate plan, he clarified, recommended some tax strategies, mentioned how my firm could manage their investments more efficiently than the local bank, but I never told them to cut you out completely. I assumed they'd split things equally, or at least leave you something substantial. His explanation was plausible. Michael was arrogant and often dismissive, but he'd never struck me as deliberately cruel. I believe you, I said finally, but it doesn't change the fact that they did cut me out, or that you've benefited your entire life from being the golden child, while I've been treated as second best in my own family. He nodded slowly. I see that now. I didn't before, or maybe I didn't want to see it. It was easier to believe I was just inherently more successful, more worthy of attention. A rare moment of self-awareness from my half-brother. Perhaps the shock of discovering his true parentage had cracked open something in him, allowed him to see beyond the narrative he'd always accepted. So what now? I asked. Where do we go from here? Michael sighed deeply. I don't know. I need to talk to Emily to figure out how to explain this to the kids. I need to decide whether I want to learn more about Diane, my biological mother. The phrase seemed foreign on his tongue. And Mom and Dad? I'm angry with them, he admitted. Furious, actually, but they're the only parents I've ever known. I can't just cut them off, especially at their age. No, I agreed. Neither can I, despite everything. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared family legacy settling around us. "I'll talk to them about the will," Michael said suddenly. "Make sure it's changed, made fair. You deserve your share, Catherine. Maybe more than your share, considering everything you've done for them." It was a gesture I hadn't expected, a small step toward rectifying decades of imbalance. "Thank you," I said simply. We didn't hug when he left. We weren't there yet, might never be. But something had shifted between us, a new understanding forming from the wreckage of old assumptions. In the 3 months since that Christmas dinner, our family has been in a state of careful reconstruction. Mom and Dad amended their will, dividing their estate equally between Michael and me. Michael and I have begun a cautious relationship as half-siblings, stripped of the pretensions and expectations that colored our interactions for decades. The truth didn't set us free exactly. It complicated everything. Forced painful reckonings created new kinds of distance even as it bridged old ones. But it did set us on a path toward something more authentic. I don't regret revealing what I discovered, though I sometimes wish I'd chosen a less dramatic moment. The family secret had shaped all of our lives in ways none of us fully understood until it was brought into the light. Sometimes at night I still hear my father's words, "You've always been a disappointment, Catherine." But now I understand they were never really about me. They were about his own guilt, his desperate need to justify choosing Michael, to convince himself that his preference for his son from another woman was based on merit rather than compensation for a lifetime of deception. In the end, I was the only biological child my parents had together, but biology isn't what makes a family. Truth might not be either, but without it, whatever we build is destined to collapse eventually. The foundations of the Abbott family have been relaid. What we construct upon them remains to be seen, but at least now we're building on solid ground.